In a world divided by flags, faiths, and frontiers, some stories rise above all boundaries. These are the stories that speak directly to the heart, not in any one language, not from any one book, but in the silent voice that every soul understands, the voice of truth, sacrifice, and courage. And one such story is that of Imam Hussain, ERA, a man whose stand in the scorching plains of Karbala 1400 years ago still echoes in the hearts of believers and non-believers alike. He was not just a grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He was a symbol of standing up when silence meant betrayal, a symbol of dignity in the face of cruelty, a symbol of love even when surrounded by hate. And it is this universal stand that has moved millions across centuries, not just Muslims, not just Shias, not just Sunnis, but Christians, Hindus, Sikhs, Jews, and even those with no religion at all. They have wept for Hussein. Why? Because Karbala is not about religion. It is about humanity. It is about a father holding his baby son in his arms, knowing he won't survive the thirst. It is about a brother saying goodbye to his sibling before riding into battle. It is about a man of God refusing to kneel before a tyrant, even if that meant death. Who cannot feel the pain of such moments? In Lebanon, Christian priests attend Muharram Majlis and speak about Hussein. In India, Christian schools distribute water and food on Ashura in memory of his thirst. In Iraq and Pakistan, Hindus and Sikhs march in mourning processions. In London and New York, people who don't even follow any religion hold signs that say Hussein belongs to all of humanity. Because when a child dies in his father's arms, when women and children are taken captive, when evil smiles over innocence, religion doesn't matter, the heart breaks the same way. Imam Hussain did not fight for power. He did not march to claim land. He stood to protect the very soul of Islam, yes, but more than that, he stood for truth, for justice, for mercy. These are values not owned by any one religion. These are values every good heart recognizes. So when a Christian weeps over Karbala, it is not surprising. It is natural. It is human. They are not weeping for a religion they do not follow. They are weeping for a man who represents the best of all faiths. There is something special about a sacrifice that still brings tears after 14 centuries. It means it was real. It means it was pure. Hussein's story didn't end in Karbala. It began there. Because from the desert rose a movement of the soul. And to this day, that movement lives on in every person who dares to stand for what is right, who chooses truth even when it is hard, who refuses to bow down to injustice no matter the cost. That person is walking the path of Hussein, even if they've never heard his name. So when we say that even Christians wept for Karbala, we're not trying to prove anything. We're simply pointing to the power of a man whose heart was so big, whose message was so pure, that it touched people far beyond his time, his land, and even his faith. Imam Hussain, the Disht Bayine, was not just a hero of Islam, he was a hero of humanity. And Karbala was not just a battlefield, it was the place where the soul of justice made its final stand. And it won. When we look at the events of Karbala, we see a story that transcends time, geography, and religion. It is not limited to Muslims, nor can it be confined within Islamic boundaries. The pain, courage, and sacrifice of Imam Hussain stirs something deep in the human soul, something that speaks the language of justice and humanity. That is why Christians, Hindus, and even people with no religious affiliation have found themselves emotionally drawn to this sacred tragedy. It's not about knowing the Islamic history or understanding the deep theological background. It's about seeing a man stand for what is right, even when the price was his life and the lives of his beloved family. There's something universal about watching someone stand up against oppression with complete dignity. Imam Hussain, R.A., knew the army before him was vast, brutal, and merciless. He knew the consequences of rejecting Yazid's rule, yet he chose the harder path, the path of truth. He chose death over dishonor. That choice doesn't belong only to one faith. That's a choice every human being is capable of understanding and honoring. And perhaps that's why Christians have joined hands in mourning the martyrdom of Imam Hussain, R.A. They see in him the echoes of their own stories of sacrifice, their own struggle against injustice, and their own pain. In some parts of the world, Christian priests attend Muharram gatherings not to preach but to mourn. In India, Lebanon, and even Western cities, churches open their doors for majlis and reflection. They recognize that Karbala was not a political battle, it was a moral cry. A cry against tyranny, a cry for the human conscience to rise and speak when silence would mean defeat. And when Christians weep for Hussain, it is not strange. It is the soul responding to purity. When a tragedy reaches that level, where people from every background feel it in their hearts, it means that the message is bigger than labels. Hussein's message has become a global legacy. His stand was for all of us. His pain, his patience, and his sacrifice remind us that truth needs no passport. And that's why even Christians cried, "For Karbala belongs to all of humanity." Throughout history, humanity has been moved by the stories of those who stood alone for what was right, no matter the cost. Imam Hussain, R.A., was one of those rare souls whose resistance didn't just touch his followers. It reached the hearts of strangers, believers and non-believers alike. When Christians cry for Karbala, they do not do so out of political interest or religious obligation. They cry because truth has a way of speaking to the heart in a voice louder than any sermon or scripture. And Imam Hussein's voice, even though silenced by swords, still echoes with purity and purpose. In many regions across the world, especially in Lebanon and India, Christian communities participate in mourning processions during Muharram. They walk with Muslims, some holding banners with Imam Hussein's name, others distributing water in remembrance of the thirst he and his family suffered. What moves them isn't theology. It's the raw humanity of Karbala. It's the story of a man who chose his principles over his life, of a family that stood firm when compromise was easier, and of children who died not knowing why the world had turned so cruel. One Christian woman in Iraq was interviewed as she stood silently beside a group of mourners. When asked why she was there, she replied, "You don't need to be a Muslim to feel this pain. You just need a heart." That answer says everything. The story of Karbala is not about conversion or creed. It's about the human experience of loss, of hope, of standing firm when everything around you collapses. What Hussain fought for, truth, justice, dignity, is what every human being longs for. He wasn't trying to build an empire or gain power. He was trying to preserve the soul of a religion, and in doing so, he touched the conscience of the world. That is why even Christians weep, because in the man who died with his head held high, they see a reflection of the kind of courage the world desperately needs. Hussain does not belong to one group. His name is stitched into the soul of humanity itself. Imam Hussein's legacy has never been about numbers or victory in the worldly sense. It has always been about impact. The battlefield of Karbala might have seen only a few brave souls standing against an army of thousands, but that small group carried a weight that still shakes the conscience of the world today. What happened in Karbala was not just a political or religious conflict. It was the triumph of moral clarity over confusion, sacrifice over selfishness, and truth over falsehood. And that is exactly why people from all faiths, including Christians, have found themselves drawn to the story of Hussain. R-A-H-A, a man whose loss became a light for generations to come. Every human being, regardless of faith, recognizes the value of standing up for what is right, even when it costs you everything. That is what Hussain did. He did not bend for convenience. He did not compromise with tyranny. He walked into the fire knowing he would not return, but his principles would live forever. That kind of courage needs no translation. It speaks to the heart of every man and woman who has ever wished the world could be better, more honest, and more just. And so, when Christians weep for Karbala, they are weeping for the loss of a man who represents what is best in all of us. The most powerful stories in history are not the ones filled with conquests or crowns. They are the ones where a person stood for the truth, with nothing in hand except faith. That's why Karbala matters. It tells the story of a man who gave up everything to protect something invisible, the soul of humanity. He did not trade his values for safety. He died thirsty, watching his family suffer, and still, he never bowed to injustice. This kind of sacrifice plants seeds in every heart across every religion. And that's why Christians, even those unfamiliar with the deeper details of Islamic history, cry when they hear of Karbala. Because in the cries of Zainab, R.A., the silence of Ali Asghar, R.A., and the final prayer of Hussain, R.A., they see not only sorrow, but strength. And in that strength, they see something deeply familiar, something deeply human. One of the most profound truths about Karbala is that it didn't just leave behind a memory, it left behind a heartbeat that still lives in millions of souls. Among those souls are people who do not identify as Muslim, people who have never opened the Quran, and yet, when they hear the name Hussain, something in them stops. They ask questions. They watch the processions. They listen to the eulogies, and some silently begin to cry, because the message of Karbala was never exclusive. It was a call to the human conscience, and conscience doesn't belong to one religion. There are countless examples across the world of Christians who have taken part in Muharram gatherings, attended mahlis, and even organized interfaith programs in honor of Imam Hussain. In Lebanon, it is common to see Christian leaders offering condolences during Ashura, acknowledging the universal values Imam Hussain stood for. In India, Christian schools sometimes mark the day with moments of silence or educational talks about Karbala's significance. Not from a religious point of view, but from a moral and historical one. These actions are not for show. They come from a place of deep respect. Because whether you are Muslim or not, when you hear that a man stood with only 72 companions against an army of thousands, refused to compromise his values, and still showed mercy to those who would kill him, you begin to see something extraordinary. Many Christians have spoken of the tears they shed while listening to the events of Ashura. They are moved by the helplessness of the children, the unwavering strength of Zainab, and the profound faith that Hussain, R.A., displayed till his last breath. These elements mirror the stories they too hold dear. Stories of prophets who stood alone, of messengers who were mocked, and of saviors who endured pain to bring light. So when they mourn for Karbala, it is not cultural imitation, it is spiritual recognition. This is what makes Karbala eternal. It invites not just Muslims, but all of humanity to feel, to reflect, and to remember. Because Hussein's sacrifice wasn't just for his time, it was for all time. And when Christians cry for him, they're proving just that. There is a reason the name of Imam Hussain, R, continues to echo in hearts across the globe, even in places where Islam is not the majority religion. The story of Karbala is not a tale confined to any one community. It is a living symbol of what it means to stand for justice, truth, and human dignity. That is why Christians, among others, have found themselves deeply moved by his sacrifice. In many places, the pain of Karbala has become a shared sorrow, and the tears for Hussein R.A. have become a universal language of respect. Christian scholars, poets, and ordinary men and women have often written and spoken about the message of Karbala. Some have compared Imam Hussain, R.A., to their own martyrs and saints, individuals who stood against cruelty and gave their lives in the name of truth. In Hussein, they see not a foreign religious figure, but a spiritual brother in the eternal fight between good and evil. His refusal to submit to injustice is a story that aligns with their own values of faith and sacrifice. Even in modern times, we find Christians attending Muharram gatherings and expressing solidarity with Muslims during Ashura. In Iraq and Lebanon, some Christian families light candles on the 10th of Muharram. In parts of India and Pakistan, they help distribute water in memory of the thirst of the family of Hussein, R.A. These are not symbolic acts. They are real expressions of shared emotion and spiritual unity. They remind us that while our paths to God may be different, our hearts can ache in the same way. It is a powerful reminder that the core of Karbala is love. Love for truth, love for faith, love for humanity. And love needs no label. When Christians cry for Karbala, they remind us that Hussein's mission was not just to save Islam from corruption, but to awaken the moral conscience of mankind. He succeeded, and the tears of those who never met him, who never read the Quran, but still weep at his name, prove that his sacrifice reached the hearts it was meant to reach. The hearts of all who still care about justice. Karbala was not just a battlefield, it was a mirror held up to humanity. In it, we saw what happens when one man chooses principle over power, truth over safety, and love over fear. Imam Hussain, R.A., was not just a leader. He was the voice of the oppressed, the shield for the innocent, and the soul of resistance. What makes his sacrifice even more remarkable is that it continues to awaken compassion in hearts far beyond the Muslim world. Christians who hear his story do not walk away unaffected. They weep, they reflect, and they often say, "This is not just your story, it is ours too." In many Christian teachings, standing against injustice is seen as a divine duty. Stories of saints and prophets who endured persecution are told to inspire courage and faith. So when Christians hear about a man who stood with only a handful of followers against a tyrannical empire, who refused to bow, who watched his family suffer but never gave up his values, it strikes a deep and familiar chord. Imam Hussain becomes, in their eyes, not a foreign figure, but a universal symbol of sacrifice for righteousness. This emotional connection has led to real actions. In Lebanon, Christian clerics attend Muharram events and even speak about Imam Hussein's message from their pulpits. In London, churches and mosques have come together for interfaith Ashura dialogues. In India and Pakistan, Christian students write essays and poems